All right, great to see everybody here. Appreciate everybody once again braving the snowstorms and sub-zero temperatures and global pandemic to be here in the house of God. All right, we call him friend, and it's awesome to be able to worship him today. I'm so glad that you're here, or if you're joining us online, we're really glad that you're here as well. I'm really excited about the lesson for today. We're in the midst of a series that we're calling Greater Vision. And it's kind of cool, like we shared about that, there's some 30 different churches throughout the states that are doing this exact same series. And I meet with them during the week and go over some of the lessons, and they put it in their own words and passions. And so it's neat to think about all these different churches talking about greater vision this year. Undoubtedly, our God is a visionary God.
Yes.
He alone has the perfect vision to see what has been, what is, and what will be for all eternity. And as He's created us in His image, He's called us to be visionaries just like Him. He's called us to see what other people can't see, and called us to fulfill His visionary plan, not only for our lives, but for the whole world, for all eternity. So this series is devoted to helping us understand what it means to be those visionaries and how to be the best visionaries for God that we can possibly be.
Awesome.
So 2 weeks ago, we're doing a really comprehensive look at vision in the Bible. 2 weeks ago, we talked about vision of God. And we talked about how important it is that before we ever even talk about what is vision for the future, to really see God in some way, shape, or form, to have personal vision of who God is and what He thinks and how He feels, what he desires. It's important to know Him like that. And we talked about some practicals, all from the book of Psalms, to stop, listen, think, cleanse, pray, and seek. And I hope you keep doing those. It wasn't just something to do that first week, but this is really what a quiet time or a devotional time with God is all about.
Yeah.
The more you do that, the more clearly you're going to see God. And that's the foundation of vision itself, to have that vision of God. Then last week, we talked about vision of the past, and so how important it is to see God in your past before you can ever see Him in your future. So if you missed either of those lessons, please watch them here on our YouTube channel. Go back, and the future ones all build on that. So it's important to kind of be in sync with us. Now we're going to look at the third dimension of vision, and that is vision of the present. But again, before we dive into that, I just want to reiterate that typically we think of spiritual vision in a future kind of a way. We think of like goals or ambitions, what we want to do for God or what God wants us to do for us. And yeah, that's important. We're going to talk about that for the next 2 weeks. But we can't really see that clearly unless we have a vision of God and a vision of how He's worked in our past. And then this week, how He's working and what He's seen in the present. And so it's really crucial. This vision of the present is probably the most overlooked of all the dimensions of vision, but it is really important. You're going to see the future more clearly if you see the present more accurately. That's kind of the summation of what we're going to talk about today. You're going to see the future more clearly only if you see the present more accurately. So there's so much we can talk about this, but I'm going to break it down for our purposes into 3 different parts. And they're kind of separate, but they all tie in with this vision of the present. I'm going to talk about a humble vision of yourself, a graceful vision of others, and a hopeful vision of trials. Okay, let's dive into those. First, a humble vision of yourself. Okay, when you think about a humble vision of yourself, how many of you guys remember who this is? Anybody remember his name? You guys ever watch American Idol?
Oh, yeah.
William Hung. Okay, this is William Hung. He goes out there and thinks he's like going to be the next American Idol. He has this great, grandiose vision. I'm going to be #1 in the world. And he digs up this Ricky Martin song, She Bangs, like, and he sings this song, and you're like, dude, you're terrible. Okay, and Simon Cowell, like, rips him apart. He had a great vision, like so many people in American Idol, and it's kind of fun to watch the show because they have this great vision for the future, but it's just not rooted and a humble vision of the present. And so we like kind of watching those people just kind of crash and burn, like, oh man, nobody told you till now that you really don't have the talent that you think you had. Well, we can kind of tease about people like William Hung, okay, and he became this, he actually made a lot of money because he did that, so he's happy about it. But in many ways, we're all like William Hung. There's a little bit of William in all of us, okay? Because there's areas of our lives that we're just kind of blinded to, that we're not aware of. And it's so easy for us to be deceived about who we are in everything from our hearts to our spirituality, our personal righteousness, our characters, our relationships with other people, our talents. It's so easy to be deceived about this vision of who we really are in the present. And when our vision of ourselves in the present gets distorted, then our vision for the future is going to be even more distorted as a result. Another illustration to think about is, you ever go into a clothes store and you're like trying on clothes and you go, man, I look really good in these. I look really skinny. I turn sideways. You're like, yeah. Well, they use those like skinny mirrors, you know, that just kind of make you look skinny. And a lot of stores, it's been proven, really use those skinny mirrors. And it's fine for confidence. You go, I want to bring that thing home. You know, you really can feel confident. It's not so good for investing in your future wardrobe, okay? Because you can get deceived by a distorted vision of the present. Well, the same thing happens with us, and it's especially common in the church. Okay, it's really common in the church because we serve a God that we know can do anything. He can just snap his fingers. He can will anything to be, speak the world into existence. So we often feel justified having like a super lofty, overinflated vision of our significance in the world and what we're going to do in the present and in the future. But there's a fine line between vision and fantasy. And sometimes we cross over in that thinking, well, God can do anything. But then also, as Christians, by the grace of God, in the heavenly dimension, in the heavenly realm, we're perfect in his eyes.
Yeah.
We're sinless in his eyes. We're flawless in his eyes. We're loved. We're secure. We're like Jesus in the eyes of God through the lens of grace. And that's awesome. That's in the heavenly realm. But in the earthly realm, maybe not so much. And so we can get deceived about who we really are in a practical sense while we live here in the earthly realm. I've been reading this book called Insight. It's a really good book. Okay, I've recommended it to Grayson. He's reading it. I got one for Todd. Todd's reading it. And it's by Tasha Urek. And it talks about how crucial it is to have an accurate view of who you really are. There's a great quote that she makes. The most important and yet least examined determinant of success or failure is self-awareness. It is the meta skill of the 21st century. Ooh, that's a good thought right there. That's like one of those deep thinkers. The meta skill of the 21st century. And this is just a business book. This isn't like a spiritual book. It's just saying how crucial it is. The number one determining factor of success or failure is how clear your vision of yourself really is. She defines what self-awareness is. It's the ability to see yourselves clearly and to understand how others see us as well. That's what self-awareness is all about. That's what having a humble vision of yourself in the present is really all about. Jesus taught a lot about this. Matthew chapter 7, verse 3. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will be able to see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So Jesus is saying it's so common to kind of see all the weaknesses in everybody else, but then never see the weaknesses within yourself. It was the meta skill of the first century as well. And then he says it another way in Revelation chapter 3, verse 17. You say I'm rich, I've acquired wealth, and do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. He's writing to the church. I mean, he's addressing this church and he's saying, hey, Christians, you're deceived. You think you're something that you're not. You say, I'm rich, I've acquired wealth, I don't need a thing. You do not realize you're actually wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. These are Christians that he's saying, listen, you're just not self-aware. Paul talks about it as well in Romans chapter 12, verse 3. By the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it's teaching, then teach. If it's to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, then do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. This is really cool because he starts off just saying, man, don't be deceived. Don't be faked out. Don't look at the skinny mirror. Don't go on American Idol thinking you're going to be the next American Idol necessarily. There's only going to be one, probably not going to be you. Don't be faked out by who you really are. But he says, rather, look at yourself with sober judgment. And then he goes on to talk about how we have different gifts. And he says that we have these gifts, not we want these gifts. Not we think we have these gifts, but each of us have different gifts. They're all different. And we can't go, I think my gift is singing. And really, you don't have that gift. He says, if you have the gift, then do it with all your strength, with all his strength. But you got to know what your gifts are and know what your gifts aren't in order to have that sober judgment and be self-aware. And then beyond these verses, there's so many more. Think about how much the Bible talks about pride. I mean, it's like Old Testament to New Testament over and over and over. It talks about how much God hates pride. Why do you think God talks so negatively about pride? In America, we're like, show a little pride. Have some pride. Come on, son, have some pride. Like, we're taught that it's kind of a good thing, and there can be a good side to it. But there's also a horrible side to it. Why? Why does God talk so negatively about it? It's because in our pride, we deceive ourselves into thinking we're something that we're not. Or not thinking we're something that we are. And then pride goes a step further, that when God or someone else tries to open our eyes, in our pride, we get defensive. And we defend the mirage of who we are, rather than pursue the truth of who God wants us to really be and recognize that we are. And so pride is super deadly in that sense to keep us from having a humble vision of the present. And beyond all these verses, you think of or in addition to that, you think about how crucial it is to have an accurate vision of yourself in every different area imaginable. Our heart, our spirituality, our characters, our personality, our strengths, our weaknesses, our talents, our abilities, our flaws, our flat sides. How clearly do you see those strengths and weaknesses in you? One of the greatest obstacles to true self-awareness is perceived self-awareness. It's like when we know enough about self-awareness to go, yeah, I'm good at that. That's when we have a real problem. It's usually the people that think they're the most self-aware that are actually the least self-aware. And it's kind of funny, okay, I'm not saying that about this church, but it's so often that there'll be a lesson that I'm doing that I'm hoping is going to hit this guy in this way, or this guy in this way, or even this lesson. And then those people come up and talk about how awesome that lesson was, because it showed all those other people what they needed, but actually they're really strong in that area. There's probably going to be people, maybe not in this group, but maybe online, they're going to say, thanks for this message, because I really believe this is a strength of mine, self-awareness. Like, don't do that, okay? If you're tempted to do that, just don't do it. The ones who think they're most self-aware are the least self-aware, because it's a constant pursuit. You never arrive and go, I have achieved complete self-awareness. No, it's a constant pursuit. And so it's kind of a good thing to keep pursuing that and recognizing you never arrive. So how can you gain a more accurate vision of who you really are, of yourself? A couple verses about this. Psalm 139, this is one of my favorites, verse 23 through 24. Prayer of David. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me, and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And if you want to really gain a humble vision of yourself, an accurate vision of yourself, pray this prayer. God, search me. Know me. See if there's anything offensive in me. Anything. And then lead me in the right way. Lead me in the way everlasting. If you pray that and really mean it, and keep praying that, God will answer that prayer. And I like that he says, and lead me in the way everlasting, because if you pray just to see all your flaws, you're going to get overwhelmed. You got to pray that next part too, and help me kind of overcome it once I see it. All right, that's important to include in there. But you ask God like that. Another verse, Proverbs 27:6. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Yeah. The people that told William Hung, hey, you're an awesome singer, you ought to go on American Idol. Okay, those were enemies. But the one who go, man, I really appreciate your effort and your energy, but don't go on American Idol, dude. You don't have the gift. Okay, wounds from a friend can be trusted. Yeah. You can trust the people that are going to be brutally honest, even though it kind of hurts. So how do you become more self-aware? You get friends around you that love you, that you can trust, that you know are going to tell you the truth about yourself. And then another practical way to see yourself more accurately, Matthew 7:20. Thus by their fruit you will recognize them. The more you examine the fruit of your life and why it's happened, the clearer you're going to see yourself. If you look and you go, where do my greatest successes come from? Where do my greatest weaknesses come from? Am I blaming other people for that? Or is that pointing to something in me? And so you examine kind of your track record, the impact, the fruit of your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And by doing so, you take kind of the credit, good or bad or ugly, for it. Then you become more self-aware. So these verses, to have a humble view, an accurate view of yourself in the present, ask God, ask others, and ask yourself. If you really pursue that, man, ask about your strengths, ask about your weaknesses, your talents, your lack of talents. Don't be defensive, don't be discouraged. Just determine you want to know more than you want to not know. That's what it really takes. It's a lifelong pursuit. But again, the more accurately you see yourself, the more accurate your vision of yourself is, the more clear your vision for the future will be. So that's the first dimension of vision of the present, a humble vision of yourself. Second, a graceful vision of others. I like this one too, graceful vision of others. Right. A verse we read in Hebrews, when we did that series a little while ago. Hebrews 12:15, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Ooh, this is such a good verse. And you think about this, and he talks about to see to it that in your life and in other people's lives, there's no bitter root that just kind of grows up. Because when it does, it just messes things up. It causes trouble. It distorts. It defiles many. Think of it this way. We're all sinners, right? And there's times we sin against God accidentally. There's times we sin deliberately. There's times we sin repeatedly, right? I mean, we all have those things. And God feels hurt by those sins. He takes our sins as personal offenses. They hurt it. They fill his heart with pain. He hurts when we sin against him. Even if we go, well, I didn't hurt anybody, it hurts him. No matter what that sin is, he feels it personally. It's like a personal offense. And he doesn't excuse sin, but he does forgive it. The whole purpose of Jesus, the whole concept of grace, Old and New Testament, is in forgiveness of sin. He doesn't dwell on our sin. He doesn't define us by our sin. He doesn't distance himself from us because of our sin. He doesn't discuss negatively about us with the angels. Man, can you believe John again? Oh my gosh, did you hear what he did last week? Like, he just doesn't do that. Because our sin just, it doesn't affect him in that way. He forgives it, wipes it clean. Our sin does not make God bitter. It doesn't give him a bitter root. Thank God for that. Well, if we sin against God on a regular basis, we're going to sin against others as well, and others are going to sin against us. And when that happens, when someone sins against us or hurts us in some way, we face a question, a choice. Are we going to imitate God in the way he gives grace to that person? Or are we just going to go with our gut and respond with our feelings? That's a choice that we always face. When we follow our feelings, we end up dwelling on that person's sin or how they hurt us. We just think about it a lot. We define that person by that offense. We forget about all the other incredible things they've done and who they are. We think about that one thing. We see their face, think of that issue. We define them by that sin or weakness. We distance ourselves from them. I don't want to be around that guy. I don't want to be around that girl because of their sin or weakness. We talk negatively to others about it. Man, I'm just sharing this just to be really open. This guy did this. We put a little qualifier on it. Bless his heart. This guy did this, or, I just want to share because I got to get it off my heart. This guy. And we talk negatively about those other people and that weakness. And we can let that sin just cause us to get bitter and just cause a bitter root to grow up that causes trouble and defiles our future. Whenever we do that, we not only hurt God because we're not imitating his grace, and we not only hurt those people by not extending that grace to them, but we hurt ourselves. And one of the greatest ways we hurt ourselves is our entire spiritual vision for the future gets distorted by that relational problem in the present. If you have a relational problem like that that's ongoing, that's it's in your heart, it's become a bitter root, it's growing up, what happens is you can't think about anything else. You can't really envision anything else. You're stuck in that thing. It's distracting. The negative tapes go through your head. Man, I've been there a few key times in my life. I can think of a time in San Francisco. I can think of a time in Denver that there was some individuals who I felt really offended by. And I found myself just thinking so much about this, being distracted by this, defining those people by that, distancing myself from them, talking negatively about them. And as a result, it just hijacked my whole vision for the future because I was stuck and twisted and turned around in that present relational problem. Does that make sense? It's kind of like this illustration, okay, bat spin. You ever done this relay race? Okay, when I was doing this little build, this transition, I got a little sick, looking at there. But has anybody ever done this?
Yeah.
Okay. Some people. So in this race, you line up a bunch of people. Okay, there's 2 lines or 3 lines of people, 2 different teams. And you got to run down there, put this bat, the bat has to stay on the ground and on your forehead. Man, I get a little queasy thinking about it. And you just run around it 10 times. Then you got to run back to the starting line, to your team. And as people do it, they're running sideways. You're dude, you're running sideways. Because when you spin around like that, the vision for the future is completely distorted. And you can't go in the right direction. That's what happens when you follow your feelings with other people's sins and weaknesses rather than extend the grace of God. Your whole track of life and vision for the future gets distorted and distracted. I've seen people leave God over one conflict like that, one person, because they just couldn't see the future clearly. All they could see was that issue with that person. So it's so important that when that happens, that when that conflict or that problem comes, when someone sins against us, to not get twisted and turned around, or if you find yourself doing it, to just stop the bat spin. Okay, go, I gotta stop. I gotta clear my head a little bit. And that's what we do as disciples. We gotta rise above the fray. It's not easy, but we rise above the fray whenever we're hurt by someone else. That's when we need to fix our eyes on Jesus. Yeah. What would Jesus do? How would he love? How would he forgive? And that's what the Bible calls us to. Forgive as the Lord forgave us. Don't follow your gut. Follow your God's grace and extend that grace. And when we have that graceful vision of others, we're able to just breathe, trust, and dream a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
You think about it. If there's some conflict or some way you've been offended that's riveting your heart and your mind's eye, your attention right now, then you've got to just find a way to forgive or to overlook the offense or to resolve the offense. The Bible talks about a lot of ways to do that, a lot of different paths, but you got to have ultimately and quickly, desperately, a graceful vision of others, no matter who they've done, no matter who they are, and no matter what they've done.
Yeah.
That's when you can breathe. That's when you can trust. That's when you can dream a whole lot easier. So the second dimension here, a graceful vision of others. And then the third and final dimension, a hopeful vision of trials. A hopeful vision of trials. In James chapter 1, James says, excuse me, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. You see what he's saying here? He says, you're going to face trials, but there's something that God is doing during those trials. They have to run their course. They're God's tool to help you to be complete, mature, and not lack anything. You know, I can often look back, and I'm sure you can as well, on really challenging times in the past. Like we talked about last week, you having a vision of the past. We can look back at those challenges and go, man, now I see that God used that to strengthen me. God used that to save me. God used that to mature me. God used that to change me. God used that to bond me to this brother or sister. Right? We can see the fruit of it in the past, that we got better because of that thing. It's a lot easier to see the benefit looking in the past than to believe the benefit in real time when you're facing that trial in the present. And that's why James says, consider it pure joy. Look at each of these phrases, okay? He says, consider it pure joy. Not just like joy, but pure joy. Like you think, a lot of things are joy, but pure joy? What is pure joy? You go, that is pure joy. Like, I don't even know what that is, but he says that's how you're to consider this, pure joy. And then it says, whenever. Like, whenever. Not like in certain situations, but whenever this happens, that's when you're supposed to consider it pure joy. Whenever. Right there in the present. And then it says, whenever you. That's the next word, you. I'm not talking about the other guy. Whenever you. And then it says, face. When you face trials, they're in your face. Okay, not just in your past, but whenever they're in your face. You're like, oh man, this trial. Oh man, this problem. Oh, this health issue. This financial issue. This job issue. This relational issue. This personal issue. Like, whenever you face those trials, it says of many kinds. No matter what they are. Just all kinds of trials. And he says, because you know. You got to know that the testing of your faith makes you better. You got to know it. And so he calls us, as we face those trials in real time, to know right then that God is going to use those and is using them to make you better. Not know it later when you see the whole picture, but know it in the present. And see, if you can have that kind of hopeful, positive view of whatever present challenges you're facing, it's going to clear up your vision to see beyond those circumstances and beyond those sufferings and trials and look into the future. Otherwise, when you're facing a trial, and they rolled around pretty consistently, right? Like this pandemic has just been here for a while. It's just parked out for a while. Sometimes there's like forever trials. Sometimes there's like out of nowhere trials. You get a flat tire tomorrow. There's things that just come up, little or big. And whenever they come up like that, what happens is they just distract you, just like the relational conflicts I was talking about. They distract you, rivet your attention, and so you're dealing with that trial, and you can't see the vision for the future. But if you can look at that trial, the way the Bible says, through this lens of hope, the hopeful vision of trials, you go, somehow, some way, God is going to use this to bring about good things. And you're not just saying that because you're a church, but like you're personally really considering it pure joy. Oh, good. Not that I'm facing this, but that this is going to do something really great in my life. Yeah. That way you're turning the present trial into a future vision, a vision of the future. And you're freed up to be able to see the future more clearly. Isn't that cool? I think it's cool to think about that. Yeah. So you think about this whole concept, vision of the future. If you can have a humble vision of yourself, a graceful vision of others, and a hopeful vision when you face these trials, then you're going to have a pretty accurate vision of the present. That's what leads to an accurate vision of the present. And when you can have that accurate vision of the present, personally, relationally, with all your circumstances and trials, then man, you're going to be freed up to be able to see the future vision much more clearly. And that's what we're going to dive into and talk about next week, is we're going to begin to talk about for the final 2 weeks, or not next week, the week after the Oprah week, we're going to talk about future vision. But this week, I want to encourage you to take a deep dive into each of these areas. Like, really sit down and think about your week and go, okay, how can I have a more humble vision of myself? Ask God about it. Ask other people about it. In our core group, we've had some incredible times the last several weeks, just like being really honest, just asking, hey, what's something that I can do differently? What's something that I should stop doing? What's something I should start doing? What's something I should never do again? All these different things. Like, what are some things I should change in my life? And we've had some really good, deep conversations about things that were there, but we didn't want to talk about. So take a deep dive, looking at yourself. Take a deep dive, evaluating your relationships. Is there some bitterness? How can you resolve that? How can you overlook it? How can you extend grace to that person? And is there a trial you're facing right now that's hijacking your joy and your vision for the future? How can you see the good that God's going to bring about? If you go after that this week in your discussions, your prayer times, your personal times, then by 2 weeks from now, when we talk about future vision, you're going to be a lot more ready to see the future a lot more clearly. So, greater vision. We talked about vision of God, the first dimension. Vision of the past, the second dimension. And today, vision of the present. And then again, next we'll talk about vision for the future. Let's go ahead and go to God together in prayer and then share communion together. Our Father in heaven, thank you for loving us enough to want us to see these things. I know it's so easy for me to get blinded about my own weaknesses or my own strengths. We can struggle with both of those. Help us all to have an accurate vision of ourselves, a humble vision of ourselves. And then help us to learn to give grace to others just like Jesus did. The whole point of communion is celebrating the grace. It's convicting to think about how much we enjoy it and how little we imitate it at times. As we think about Jesus, help us to focus on his grace and focus on his truth of ourselves just like that. And then just to have hope for the future, that you are the God of all vision. You're the God of all hope. And so I pray that you'll give us open eyes to see our present challenges through that confident lens of hope for the future. Help us to have your true, accurate vision for the present, so that we can really see what you have in store for us in the future. We fix our eyes on Jesus right now and want to imitate all of his grace, all of his truth, and all of his power to work in our lives. It's in his name we pray.